Were you traumatized as a child by watching Unsolved Mysteries?
Do you like to judge facial hair?
Guess what?
We have a podcast for you.
Can you believe it? It's called Perhaps It's You, and it is an unofficial Unsolved Mysteries rewatch podcast.
We're your hosts. I'm Samantha.
I'm Liz. We're two cool mystery ants, not really. Watch an episode of Unsolved Mysteries each week
And tell you about it.
We update you if any of the mysteries have been solved.
We rate the episode on a scale of Robert Stacks. We can give episodes a possible 5 out of 5 Robert Stacks, although it rarely happens.
Very rarely. We also complain about what everyone is wearing, and it doesn't really matter if you know anything about Unsolved Mysteries or not. You should tune in because it's the #1 podcast on iTunes.
Yeah, you can find us on Google Play, Apple Podcasts, most podcast platforms. You can also check out our website, perhapsit'syou.com, or find us on the social medias at Perhaps It's You.
And
get out there and solve some mysteries, bitches!
yeah!
Welcome back to Queens of the Damned, a horror podcast. This week we are talking about As Above, So Below, and the fun lore that comes with that movie. So we are going to talk about Nicholas Flamel and alchemy, the Paris catacombs, and we're also going to talk about all the Dante's Inferno references throughout the movie. And we also talk a little bit about the ending, so if anybody was confused by it or just didn't like it, you can kind of get our opinion on that as well. So enjoy. So As Above, So Below starts out with a young woman, Scarlett Marlowe, which I just realized what her last name was.
Yep.
Kind of fantastic.
Yep.
So Scarlett starts out the film retrieving what's called the Rose Key in Iran, narrowly escapes with her life, and she travels to Paris in search of a headstone, I believe, of Nicholas Flamel's. She enlists Benji to kind of create a documentary about her journey to find the Philosopher's Stone.
So, Scarlett's father was a renowned scholar on alchemy, and particularly Nicholas Flamel, and he had sort of spent his life looking for the Philosopher's Stone, and so now she's devoted to not really this cause, but this search. And so I did some research on Nicholas Flamel, and of course he's one of these figures that is shrouded in mystery, and it's really hard to tell fact from fiction, and not only because this happened so long ago, but because alchemy is one of those more mystical or mysticized practices, so to speak. But I found a couple good sources on alchemy, and one was from alchemylab.com, and the other was from the Smithsonian Mag. So this Alchemy Lab website says that the story of Nicholas Flamel is the story of a book, which I thought was really, really interesting. And Flamel was a bookseller in the mid to late 14th century, and he owned a 2-foot by 2.5-foot stall right next to Saint Jacques la Boucherie in Paris. I'm going to butcher all these French names, by the way. 4 years of French, that got me nothing. So, he eventually was able to make enough money through his business to buy a house in the Rue de Marivaux, and he used the first floor for book selling. Basically, all of our dream careers, like your first floor of your house is your bookshop, and then the rest of your house is just like, you don't even have to get up and go to work in the morning. All you have to do is walk downstairs. Awesome stuff. So there he also gave writing lessons to nobles, because back then, well, actually, no, it's still that literacy is power and the ability to write is power. So he gave all these lessons to these extremely important people in Paris. And he was very interested in alchemy. One night he allegedly dreamed that he was visited by an angel, and this angel was holding, of course, a book. And the angel said to him, Look well at this book, Nicholas. At first you will understand nothing in it, neither you nor any other man. But one day you will see in it that which no other man will be able to see. So, soon after that, a man came to his shop to sell him a book. And when he realized it was the book he'd seen in his dream, he paid 2 florins for it without asking, or without bargaining. And I looked it up just because I was curious. 2 florins was $1.12. Apparently that meant a lot to people back then. But that's kind of funny to me now. Anyway, so this book had an inscription that identified it as the Book of Abraham. And this binding, for those of you who are book nerds like us, it's like one of these like luxuriously bound and really preciously made books. The binding, it was made of copper and it contained writing in Greek and other languages, and Flamel couldn't really identify these languages. Instead of parchment, which was what they used to make books back then, the paper was made of the barks of young trees, and the script was done extremely clearly written, with an iron-tipped instrument on these gilded pages. So if you don't know what gilding is, it's like when they do the edges in gold. And its inscription cursed those who handled it, unless they were a priest or a scribe. So luckily for Flamel, he was a scribe, or he considered himself a scribe, but he still kind of picked this book up with caution. And as he flipped through it, he noticed the repetition of the word Maranatha, which at the time he didn't know what that meant. So Flamel had long been interested in alchemy, and most people see alchemy as obsessed with the possibility of what they call transmutation, which is the act of changing one element into another, and many of us think of it as like the attempt to change base metals into gold when they think of alchemy. So this sounds like at best naive to us now in the 21st century, but this is where this Smithsonian article comes in. And this was a 2014 article. And some scholars have recently begun to believe that alchemists were actually performing real scientific experiments that produced valuable results, but those results kind of got appropriated or stolen by future scientists. So their opinion is that these more respected scientists, such as Newton, took them. And one of the examples of this is the concept that the universe is made out of a set of different elements, which is a super important finding, and apparently, allegedly, the alchemists were the first ones to come up with this. And this thought, though, is not universally accepted. It's extremely controversial still amongst historians. So my takeaway from this is that if the story about this book is true, it's probably best to view Flamel as a guy who is interested in attaining knowledge, just like any scholar, historian, or reader of books. I just hesitate to shroud him in all this mysticism because I know that he's a real person, or I at least believe he was a real person, and I can follow the train of thought where he's, like, interested in this knowledge, but not the crazy train of thought where he's like, yes, I'm gonna, make gold out of everything, I think there's some basis in reality here, and I don't want to lose touch of that. So with that being said, it's purported that Flamel thought the secret to controlling life and death was contained in this book. And there was a small problem, was that he couldn't read most of it. So he copied some pages and he made them public, and hoping basically that someone who's familiar with the Kabbalah would be able to translate it for him. And he had no luck. Mostly people laughed at him. But the main problem was that the Jews had been driven out of France at this time, and many of them had moved to Spain. So because he didn't have Facebook or email or anything like that, instead of sending these pages somewhere, he had to make an extremely dangerous journey to Spain to find someone to read this. And he finally finds a man named Maestro, and I'm going to say the name wrong, Conches, who tells him that he's familiar with this book And in fact, he's been looking for it for his whole life. And yeah, I know. Look on Miranda's face is like, oh, what a coincidence.
I know, it's so great.
So, Maestro tells him that the book has this way of getting itself into the hands of people who are destined to have it. So, after gaining an understanding of the book's contents with these translations, he's able to first turn mercury into silver and then silver into gold, which, of course, made him extremely rich. And according to some historians, there are records of him donating large amounts of money to the poor, founding hospitals, and erecting whole cemeteries, which is what makes me think that part of this is true. But what I can't figure out is, then how does this bookseller, who is making a fairly modest living, funding these large things? It's very strange. It is. I'm not going to say that's what it was, that he was turning base metals into gold, but it's a little weird. So, however, though, the story goes that he never let it go to his head, and he despised materialism, and he just kept giving away all these riches. And he continued on as this modest bookseller and scholar, and he wrote several books on alchemy before he died at the age of 80. Lived a really long life for the 14th century. But it was after his death that these rumors began about what he had left behind. Healing powders, which I'm interpreting as the Philosopher's Stone because it's said to be composed of these, like, tinctures. And this great amount of riches, of course. And it was believed that the key to finding the treasure was hidden on his tombstone. So this is something that As Above, So Below used a really interesting historical or mythical detail there. And people basically ransacked his house and the surrounding areas for centuries trying to find the Philosopher's Stone and all the riches that he left behind. And allegedly, someone who, I can't remember who it was, but someone said that they saw him like 100 years after his death. And that he was still alive, of course, because of the Philosopher's Stone, and this kind of helped to just keep this legend alive.
How did they know? How did they know it was him if it was 100 years later?
Yeah.
I mean, drawings. There's this. He was kept alive in the public's memory. People did not forget him as they would forget other people, I guess. And they said that it had to be him. I don't know why. Obviously not true. Obviously,
right.
fault that logic, but anyway, he was well remembered, and people just kept, like, saying all these crazy things about him. And that's the somewhat humble but kind of extraordinary story of Nicholas Flamel, who will never know how much of that is true and how much of it isn't.
Interesting.
Awesome.
I learned a lot, guys.
I honestly... This is probably really embarrassing, but I'd never heard of him. Well, though, I mean, I was really young when I read it, but I'd never heard of him until I read Harry Potter. But I was like 13, so I think that's reasonable.
Me neither. I was just congratulating myself in my head on not talking about Harry Potter once.
Well,
during that whole
it had to
thing.
be brought up. Everyone's thinking
I didn't even
Look, we have to ruin it.
I didn't even
I brought
know.
my Slytherin jacket out today.
I didn't even connect Harry Potter to this until you guys said something about it. Like, I never made that.
Yeah.
Is it Nearly Headless
No,
Nick?
so the first book...
No?
Oh no!
It's
the Philosopher's
Yeah, the
Stone.
first book in the UK is called Harry Potter and the Philosopher's
Oh.
Stone. And they
Okay.
mention in the book, like, at the end, Dumbledore mentions that, Nicholas and his wife, have no problem with us getting rid of the Philosopher's Stone because they've lived for a really long time. Yeah.
Okay. It's been a long time since I've seen that first movie, so I never caught that.
Yeah.
I think I had heard of Nicholas Flamel through other means. I don't really know how. I'm pretty sure I did.
There's an extremely popular YA series called The Alchemist or something.
I've heard of that. Yeah.
I think that's how a lot of people know who he is now. Like, a little bit younger than us generations.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and he was just in the new Fantastic Beasts movie, I guess, which I did not see. But I know that he was either in it or he was referenced quite a bit. So he's back in the news.
Okay, so after they find Flamel's tombstone, they kind of figure out where the Philosopher's Stone is going to be, and they decide the best way to get there, because it's going to be underground. I think they said, I can't remember what the exact distance is, but it should be halfway between surface level and hell. So they have to get to that halfway point. And they decide the only way to do that is through the catacombs.
So the catacombs in Paris, so I have been to the catacombs. Nikki, I think you said you've been too, right?
No, I wish.
Okay. All right. Well, I've been, and they're very cool. They're very creepy. Basically, the catacombs are an underground tomb. So Paris, obviously, is an ancient city. I mean, there are Roman ruins outside of Paris. So people had been living there for a really long time. And by the 17th century, cemeteries in Paris were literally overflowing with dead bodies. So they basically would bury everyone in like mass graves, like one on top of the other. And they were running into an issue where the bodies were stacked so high that, like, when it would rain, the dirt on top of the top body would, like, wash away. And these decomposing corpses would just be laying there.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's this neighborhood, La Halle, and that's probably not how you pronounce it, but I made that up. So that's a neighborhood in Paris. That's by Les Innocents, which is the oldest and largest cemetery in Paris, which is also very cool. And the people near that cemetery basically started to really complain because it smelled like rotting bodies all the time. And in the summer, of course, it would be worse. And then, like I said, anytime it rained, it would be terrible because the dirt would wash away from on top of these mass graves. So in 1763, King Louis XV banned all burials inside the city. However, obviously France was then and still is an extremely Catholic country. And so the Catholic Church basically said, you can't dig these people up. You know, they've been buried in religious burials. Like, you're stuck with them, basically. So he said no one else could be buried from this day forward in Paris. However, we're not going to do anything about the overflowing cemeteries. So that kind of continued for the next few years, just this kind of the same issue, until May 31st, 1780. There was a basement of a home, and it was adjoining the Les Innocents Cemetery, and it collapsed due to the wall of the basement collapsed, due to the weight of the mass grave behind it, which caused a pile of rotting corpses to spill into this home. So this really started this huge push to do something about these cemeteries. Like, this, obviously just stopping burials was not enough. This cannot continue. So in 1785, the government passed a law to convert the tunnels that already existed beneath Paris into catacombs and begin emptying cemeteries. So these tunnels were limestone tunnels. There are huge limestone deposits underneath the city of Paris, and they had mined a lot of the limestone. And so there were just miles and miles of tunnels that weren't being used at all. So in 1786, the city began moving the bodies into the catacombs, and it took 12 years to empty the cemeteries and move all of the bodies. They moved between 6 and 7 million corpses, with the oldest being from approximately 1200 years prior. And then obviously, in the middle of this, what happens? The French Revolution happens. So during the French Revolution, people who were killed were some of the first that were skipped the cemetery and buried directly in the catacombs. After the French Revolution, they finished moving all the bodies, but in 1810, I'm going to butcher this name too. So Louis Etienne Héricourt du Thury? Don't know. But he was the director of the Paris Mine Inspection Service. And he went down to the catacombs and he was horrified because all of the bones were basically just tossed in there in like a giant pile. And he thought that it was really disrespectful. He thought that this looks like crap. And so he undertook a project to renovate the catacombs into what we see today. So he ordered the skulls and the femurs to be stacked in that kind of famous crisscross pattern that we see. He built like the giant pile of bones that's just kind of a freestanding structure, all of that. And then he went to the old cemeteries and he took cemetery directions to complement the bones. So obviously that's the tablets with the, you know, the sayings and the warnings that you see in As Above, So Below, you know, that say something like, I don't know, it's some variation of like, this is the entrance of hell or something like that. He then walled the catacombs off from the rest of the left bank tunnel system. And then his final display, I guess, was there is a separate room in the catacombs that you can go into, and it's a museum kind of all of the physically deformed bones that they found while they were doing this. And it just kind of displays them and explains like, oh, this person had, you know, scoliosis, so their spine was really curved, and you know, this person died from a broken leg, so as you can see their femur is like almost completely cracked in half, that kind of stuff. Yeah. Ooh. So almost immediately after the bodies began being moved, wealthy Parisians started going down there for tours, and general public visits began after the renovations were complete, and then after one of France's many wars, the 1814 to 1815 war. But then in 1833, it was closed to the public due to complaints by the Catholic Church, who thought that this was really disgusting, that all of these bones were displayed and people could basically walk through this huge mausoleum. But then in 1850, they opened it again. It's kind of open on and off going into the future, and now, though it is open for daily visits, you can only tour about 1 mile of the catacombs. The total is about 200 miles long. Wow. And they do reference this in As Above, So Below. Obviously, some of the parts of the catacombs that the group takes them to are the parts that are walled off, that the general public cannot see. Mm-hmm. So there are quite a few notable people that are buried there, including the writers Francois Rabelais and Charles Perrault, who, if any of you are familiar with fairy tales, he has some extremely, extremely famous, beautiful fairy tale illustrations. And then Robespierre and Georges Danton, who, of course, were big in the French Revolution. After they were guillotined, they were brought directly down to the catacombs and buried there. So during World War II, members of the French resistance used the tunnel system, including the catacombs, to smuggle information in and out of Paris. And then eventually the Nazis did establish a bunker down there. Because they figured out that they were using the tunnel system. So since then, I mean, there has been a resurgence of people who call themselves cataphiles. And this is the group that is seen in the movie. Papillon, I think is his name, the guy who takes them into the tunnels. Yeah. So they are basically groups of people who secretly explore the tunnels. They know secret entrances in. They put on art shows, theater performances, movie nights down there. In 2004, Oh yeah, in 2004,
Yes.
the police discovered a full movie theater in one of the caverns. There was like a movie theater screen, a projector, seats for the audience. There were recent movies down there. There was a fully stocked bar and restaurant tables and chairs. Yes.
Oh my
Yes. So
God.
people had been basically running like a Cinemark out of the catacombs. Yeah.
This is amazing. It sounds like the
I
best
know.
day ever.
And they never figured out who built it. And then they also could never figure out how they got power down there to show the movies.
Oh God.
Yeah.
I didn't even think
Yeah.
about that.
They never figured it out.
Oh my God.
So then in 2015, Airbnb held a Halloween contest to spend the night in the catacombs. And the winner was a Brazilian man named Pedro Arruda. And he did spend the night in the catacombs. They gave him like an air mattress and a bunch of flashlights. And like there he was sleeping down there, which I would never do. So hats off to him. I would
I would
absolutely
so do
not.
it.
Yeah,
I
I
feel
would do
like
it
that's
too.
just
That'd be cool.
I feel like that's just like inviting bad spirits in. And then obviously As Above So Below. So that was the first movie with permission to actually film inside the catacombs, which there was some controversy in France. I mean, I think France, it seems like, has kind of a love-hate relationship with the catacombs. Like on one hand, it's neat and it's a neat thing that they have in their city. And like I said, there are cataphiles who go down there all the time. But on the other hand, I think they sort of feel like these are people's bodies. And again, France is a pretty religious country. And so there was definitely some mixed feelings about letting this movie film down there. But yeah, that's the catacombs. If you have a chance to go. It's very cool. It's very creepy. It was fun when we went. I mean, you go on a little tour. And they take you around. I mean, they don't just let you wander by yourself, obviously. They have a nice gift shop. I have stuff from it. I don't know where it is. It's in a box somewhere. But I do have stuff that I bought there. But yeah, it's really interesting. It's very cool to see. And yeah, it's creepy.
So, can I add a comment about one of the things that you said? So, the cinema and stuff like that, I love it because so people used to see cemeteries as gathering places, and I think we need to bring that back. And I think it's an extremely death positive thing to like treat it as if it's a place to gather and not be afraid of, and like this is just a part of life. And I'm so glad that, like, people have gone in and made use of that.
Oh, I agree.
But, like, I also see the spectacle part of it. I see where, like, yeah, it's kind of, like, weird to I don't want to say, like, fetishize all, like, that display of dead bodies and stuff, but also it's, like, this is just a part of the whole deal, you know, and like people being comfortable with that is super awesome.
It definitely is, and they do get into that a little bit on the tour. I mean, they do sort of explain how it does come into conflict between those two thoughts, between the thought of, hey, you know, these people, first of all, these people are dead anyway. They don't even know what's happening. And so they've built this beautiful display for, you know, these bones that otherwise would have just been sitting below ground forever. And that's really cool. But then on the other hand, you know, you have people who, even if they're not religious, but who just feel very strongly that, you know, once you are buried, you should stay buried. And they, you know, and the fact that not only did they dig these people up, but now tourists are going through there and breaking things because things have been broken, you know, from people touching. Yeah, from you know, from people touching things. But yeah, it's I mean, they definitely get into that a little bit when you take the tour there, but I can see both sides. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
But again, I mean, these people are long dead. It's not like they're still burying people down there. I mean, none of these people's relatives are still alive, you know?
I think even if they were and there was consent involved, that would be okay.
Yeah.
Because, like, nowadays you can do whatever you want with your
Right.
body, which is really awesome. I don't know. Yeah, I love how there's that huge conflict between those two.
There is. And like I said, I mean, you can really tell, I think, just from even reading stuff online. I think, you know, because obviously when I was over there, I was not talking to any Parisians about their feelings about the catacombs. But, you know, just from reading stuff online, there seems to be some conflict with whether this kind of thing is cool or not. Whether, you know, it's one thing to have it and let people see it, but then it's another thing to film a horror movie down there. You know, so I think maybe that was also part of it, is just this idea that, you know, a tour is one thing, but letting people make a movie down there might be a bridge too far, but who knows?
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's the catacombs. They're really cool.
Yeah. So much
America
to think
doesn't have
about.
anything like that.
No. We have
No.
some pretty cool cemeteries.
We do, but there is something about being in France or Spain or Monaco that there's so much history, and it goes back so much further than American history. And it was just like, you are literally surrounded at all times by history. And it's very cool. It's very cool.
I got that sense when I went to Italy, because when we were in Florence, the rest of the tour wanted to go, like, buy leather and buy gold. And I went off by myself and I went to Dante's house. And it was just like this medieval tower in the middle of the city. And it's just mind-blowing. Yeah, we don't have anything nearly that old here.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah,
a
I mean,
totally
it's-
different feeling.
It really is. It really is. And even when you're on, like, the Champs-Élysées in Paris, which is the big shopping thing, I mean, you're still surrounded by history. I mean, the Tomb of the, you know, with the Eternal Flame, the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier is right there. And the Arc de Triomphe is right there. So, I mean, you're still totally surrounded, even when you are shopping at Gucci or Prada or whatever. Yeah. So, it's very cool. Okay.
So they eventually make their way down into the catacombs, obviously. And like Rachel said, they realize that they can't get to the places they need to get to, so they enlist Papillon and his crew to take them down into the catacombs. And they end up stuck at one spot, or they get looped around, kind of, at one point, and they have to take a passage that Papillon has never gone in before and was told to never enter. Because anyone who's gone in there has not come out, so no one ever ventures in because they don't know where it goes. So on their way in there, they find one of Papillon's old friends, and he's basically gone crazy. He's kind of, I think he's kind of the first Dante reference, kind of loose reference, because he kind of becomes their Virgil. Okay, so after they find this guy, they just kind of keep going deeper and deeper, because he keeps telling them the only way out is to keep going down, which is yet again another reference to Dante's Inferno, because that's what Virgil keeps telling Dante. The only way to get out is to go through the 9 circles of hell. And I guess, since I'm already talking about Dante, I can kind of explain what the Inferno is. So, the Inferno is the first section of the Divine Comedy, which is would it be considered an epic poem?
I believe so.
Yeah. So it's an epic poem. It has 3 parts: Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. So the edition that I used for this is translated by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. And I think it was one of the first translations. But the Divine Comedy, well, actually, just the Inferno itself is split into cantos, which are basically chapters. and it is written in a terza rima, which is a 3-line stanza, which is actually kind of significant because the style of writing lines up all in threes, which of course threes are kind of like a holy number. Kind of one of the important things to point out in Dante's Inferno is that there's a difference between Dante the poet and Dante the character, because Dante the character, so weird to explain, Dante is the main character, but you have to kind of separate them. Dante is led through the 9 circles of hell by Virgil, one of the poets that Dante kind of looks up to, and of course he wrote the Aeneid. And they are traveling through the 9 circles of hell. And each circle represents one of the 7 deadly sins, besides the first circle, which is limbo. And that's kind of the home for people who, like, for example, people who died unbaptized because they lived before Christ.
I always thought that was really unfair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree, but also, like, they're not even really punished. They just kind of hang out in limbo. They're just kind of, like, there.
But don't they say that limbo is, like, really sad because they know that, you know, they're not in hell, but they know they can never get to heaven. So I think, doesn't Dante say something about, like, it's just kind of a depressing place?
Yeah, that's true.
That's a direct quote, by the way.
That's exactly how he says, boy, this place is a downer.
But yeah, so limbo is that first one. It isn't, obviously it isn't one of the sins, but it's there, and I think it's interesting that it's there. But the Inferno is known for its creative punishments because they all fit their sin. So they come to a point where, as they're traveling through the catacombs, not even really the catacombs at this point, because they're so deep, but they're walking across this pathway that's like got water right in the middle of it, and they step into the water, and the sound is altered, and it sounds like they're underwater. And you start hearing bells, and they're screaming. That's also a reference to Dante's Inferno, because it's supposed to kind of parallel the shores of Acheron, which is the border of hell, and that's in Canto 3. So actually, when Dante arrives at Acheron, he doesn't hear bells, but he hears screaming. Lots and lots of screaming and shrieking. And Dante actually asks, what is that? And Virgil says, not what, but who. It's the exact exchange that the group has with their guide, which I thought was really cool that they did. They eventually make it into the chamber that has the Philosopher's Stone in it. And they pull it out, and they realize, like, they can heal wounds and all that kind of fun stuff. But Papillon's group breaks into, like, the treasure and stuff, and it's a trap. They end up stuck in that room for a little while, but they end up getting out, and they have to go down once again. So they go down, and they enter this chamber where they have to go through a tunnel where you can pretty much only fit on your stomach, and above the tunnel, it's in Italian. I'm not gonna attempt to speak it myself, but basically it says, abandon all hope, wait a minute, that's not right. Is that right?
That is right.
Yeah, abandon
Yes.
all hope, ye who enter here. I thought I had it backwards, which is, again, a direct quote from Dante's Inferno. It's in Canto 3, and it's the inscription above the gates of hell. They also mention they will be made to crawl on their bellies into the kingdom of darkness, which is exactly what they have to do. And that's, again, another Dante reference. I think it says something like that in the Bible, doesn't it? They will be made to crawl on their bellies into the kingdom of darkness.
Yes.
Okay,
That's
I thought so. So that is another reference. And then you kind of start getting into references to the actual punishments in Dante's Inferno. We start seeing instances of Scarlet's father's suicide, which is kind of a loose reference to the 7th circle of hell, which is violence against self, and that's for suicides. But the punishment isn't really, like, enacted. It's just, I think it's just supposed to be, like, a loose reference. Also, there is a punishment of simony and the fraudulent, and it's when Papillon is sucked into the flaming car, and then he's stuck in the ground with his feet sticking out. Couldn't really figure out why Papillon was punished for simony or fraudulency.
I think it's because his motivation for going down into the catacombs was to get the treasure.
Okay.
And so I think that the idea is that, I think the Simonist or whatever they're called, they would sell treasure or heavenly treasure for profit. And so he was willing to do this for profit.
Okay.
So I think that's why.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we also have a blood river when Scarlet is making her way back because she realizes she doesn't have the real Philosopher's Stone. She falls into a blood river, which is a reference again to violence against the neighbor or violence against others, which is Circle 7. And that's where people are literally drowning in a boiling river of blood. It's kind of a fun one. And we also have an instance of robed figures. I wasn't 100% sure about this one, but I think it's supposed to be a reference to hypocrisy, which is the 6th ditch of the 8th circle, which is the fraudulent. And they have to wear these kind of like monk's robes that have lead inside of them, so they're constantly weighed down. So I'm thinking that's kind of what's going on there with the robed figures. We also have George's brother who is floating underwater. He kind of freaks out about seeing his brother there. And actually, that was a punishment for the Sullen, which is the circle for wrath. And I don't have it written down which circle that is. But I think it's more so supposed to be a punishment for George being sullen. There are instances of like stone men as well, and I'm wondering if it's supposed to be because Medusa is at the top of the city of Dis. That could be wrong. They could have just done it because it was cool. I don't know. And then there's like walls with faces in them, and then the floor has faces in them, and I don't know what that's about. It feels like it's supposed to be a reference to Inferno, but I tried really hard to figure out what it could possibly be, and it's nothing. But yeah, and then the ending is like the Inferno as well. They fall to their death, which that's not Inferno, but of course they live. But when they emerge, they keep just going downward, and then they end up back on Earth. So they push what are they called? A manhole out of the way, and then when they come through the manhole, they emerge topside again, which is exactly how the Inferno ends. They basically go up a few stairs, and you're back on Earth. And yeah, that's Dante's Inferno and As Above, So Below. Woo-hoo.
And they have to confess their sins before they can get out, right?
Yeah, they do. They have to, I think, reconcile with what they've done.
Yeah, they have to admit what they did.
I was kind of trying to figure out why... I get why George and Scarlet lived, because they're, like, the main characters. But Zed is, like, a minor character, and he's the one that lived. And he was part of Papillon's group. I thought that was really weird, because Suxi dies really early on. And, like, there's no reason for Suxi to die and for Zed not to die, you know? So, I don't know. That was something that I was kind of wondering about.
So, my first question was, what do you think about the ending of this film? Like, do you like the way it turned out?
I did like it. I thought that it was interesting. I liked the idea that they were stuck in hell, but they could redeem themselves. Because, of course, the only way out of hell is redemption. The only way to escape hell is redemption. And I like the idea that you may have done a bad thing in the past, but you still deserve another chance. And they were able to admit what they had done and get that other chance. So I did like it. Sometimes I think horror movies end... Sometimes I like to see a horror movie where people actually get out. You know, I don't always need them to end on like a depressing, everybody dies type way. So I kind of liked that it had a I guess you could say, a happy ending.
Sure.
Sorry, I was looking up something that was in the movie. Because, like, that whole redemption thing, they talk about it being an alchemy reference, actually. Visit the interior of the earth, and by rectifying what you find there, you will discover the hidden stone. Yeah, that's how she realizes that they have to rectify what they've done.
Right.
But it also does connect to the Inferno as well, because as Dante travels through, he starts to realize his own sins and the wrongs of his sins. So I liked the ending a lot.
Okay.
Because I think it kind of stuck to what the story was.
Right. Okay, now that I hear that, it's a little different. Because for me, like, the ending seemed a little convenient. Like, that they're in this terrible place and they're so deep in the earth, and then all of a sudden they walk up a few steps and it's, oh, we're all good. But now that I hear that about the redemption and about the way those narratives go, it makes a little more sense to me.
I almost wonder if you think of it in, like, the as above, so below sense as well. Like, everything is reversed. So, like, if they're going down the whole time, maybe when things are reversed, they're actually
going up.
Going up?
Right. Yeah.
That wouldn't make sense if it's hell,
kinda
but
weird.
like, I don't, since they added the as above, so below thing, I mean,
right.
Goes. Yeah.
That does make sense.
The one thing that I did catch upon rewatching it is, so of course the girl in the club is the girl in the robes. I realized that the first time around. But that the boy who tells Scarlet and her friends to find Papillon, like that weird boy that they find on the street, he's the boy that's in the burning car that pulls Papillon in.
Oh.
I didn't catch that.
And kills him. Yeah, because he's the one that he left to die in the car.
Oh my god.
I didn't catch that either until the second time I was watching it.
Wow.
That's really neat.
Yeah, so I really liked that a lot.
That's cool.
I think we touched on this one a little bit. So I noticed that this story kind of canonizes Dante's version of hell and thus parts of Christian or Catholic mythology, like the need for confession for salvation. So how do you feel about that? And Rachel kind of said something about it already. And do you feel that the punishments were deserved?
So I think that, and some of this was kind of brought up from what we were discussing a couple of days ago when I was looking up stuff about the Knights Templar, which we didn't really get into for this. But I think that a lot of this alchemy and obviously any kind of like ancient or Middle Age mythology is so intertwined with religion anyway that you almost have to go with the religious angle. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so like if this stuff is true in this world, then the religious stuff that goes with it is hand
exactly
in hand.
Because it's so intertwined with reality. And I know that I've heard in the past that, you know, people feel that Jesus could perform types of alchemy because, of course, he turned water into wine. And so that was almost a divine power, that alchemy is a divine concept, I guess, or a divine power. So yeah, so I feel like it goes hand in hand. It doesn't bother me. I mean, I'm not a religious person, but it really doesn't bother me at all. I thought it was a neat angle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I will say it was kind of odd to me that they would choose to put some of the punishments from Inferno in there, but they didn't include the punishment that's specifically for alchemy. Because there is...
What is that punishment?
Really? Yeah, there is I want to say maybe it's the circle for the fraudulent, but alchemists have their own ditch in one of the circles.
I'm looking.
And
yes. Right now. A ditch.
I don't know why that's so funny. They're called bolgias in the text, but it's certain sections of each circle of hell in some instances. And their punishment was that their heads were turned backwards.
Oh my god, that sucks.
Yeah. The picture in my book is really cool.
Recap of Canto 29 of Dante's Inferno. From the Paris Review, how fitting. Let's see. It says, alchemists are afflicted with a kind of super leprosy. It's an interesting way of putting it.
Leprosy, man. What?
I know. That's so interesting.
Well, okay,
to point it out,
so it's really weird. When I was reading it, it sounded more like it was a disease, like they were covered in diseases and stuff, but kind of when you look it up, some people say that their heads are turned backwards, and there are images out there of that of that punishment of the heads being turned backwards. It's really weird.
Let's see, it says Dante will speak with the alchemists who are afflicted with a sort of super leprosy. As they cross the ridge and descend among the sinners, Virgil calls to two shades who are propped up against each other and scratching the skin from their own bodies. They are mangled and viciously maimed. Think of the face melting scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Okay, see...
The first sinner is Griffolino di Arezzo, who was punished for his alchemy but killed for a different reason. He swore to Albero de Siena that he knew how to achieve flight, and when it was revealed that he was lying, Albero had him burned alive. And then another alchemist, Capocchio, speaks up. He was also burned alive. Capocchio is believed to have been an early acquaintance of Dante's. The two may have met when they were both students. He speaks with the same sort of dark wisdom and ethereal regret that all the great sinners of the Inferno have mastered, but Capocchio does it in just a few lines, as opposed to, say, Ulysses, who required a whole monologue. So yeah, it kind of sounds like they are not only covered in, like, sores and stuff, because it does say they are mangled. So, like, their bodies are twisted around, so I could see where their heads were backwards.
Yeah. See, and, like, when I read it the first time, it sounded more like it was like infectious diseases. But, yeah, when I was kind of... Because I was looking around a little bit just to make sure that I was fully understanding. Just, like, because I didn't want to come on here and be, like, sound like an idiot, I guess. And someone said that, and I didn't... Yeah. I don't know. Everybody reads it differently.
That is really interesting. I do kind of wonder why there was no punishment for alchemy.
And that's why I was trying to figure out who that Templar was, because I was like, is that supposed to be Flamel? Like, and I don't know any of, like, hardly any religious references. Inferno is kind of where it ends. And Paradise Lost.
Well, Flamel is who they find in the tomb. Like, the old guy.
Are you sure?
Right?
No, I don't think so. Cause
that's who I thought it was supposed to be.
So, the way I saw it was, like, because everything was reversed, I'm pretty sure it was just that Knight Templar, except dead. Because it was the exact same room.
Yeah.
So that's how I always saw it. But, so I was thinking, like, if the punishment for the alchemists is that, like, sickness, those hooded figures are, like, wheezing when they first walk into that room. So I wonder if that's what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
I don't know. I would have thought that they would have made it very, very clear if they were doing that.
The hooded figures that chase them? Yeah, I don't know. And I don't know if they're supposed to be alchemists or not.
Yeah, I don't know. It reminded me more so of the punishment for hypocrites, I guess, because of the robes, but... Yeah, when they walked in, they were, like, wheezing and everything. Like, breathing really weird, so...
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know.
I wonder if there's, like... I just have this problem with, like, all of these people, or at least she, Scarlet, is looking for specifically the Philosopher's Stone. Is there a punishment? Like, are you then an alchemist if you want the Philosopher's Stone? Like, I don't... So why wouldn't there be a punishment for coveting that? If alchemy is in itself a punishable sin, then how is coveting something an alchemist made not?
Well, I would say...
discovered.
I think that's a point that's up for debate, because the thing that causes them to have to go into hell is they find that treasure room and it's a trap and it collapses and then they have to go down. And so I guess the question is it Papillon's greed for the treasure that causes them to have to descend into hell? Or is it Scarlet's greed or coveting, I guess you could say, to find the Philosopher's Stone that causes them to have to descend into hell? I don't know.
They also don't have the punishment for greed in there either, which I thought was interesting. They kind of, like, pick and choose random punishments to throw in there.
Well, and the other people made it out, so if they hadn't made it out, they could have been punished.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think they got all the way down. in the punishments. Like, they didn't get all the way, obviously, to, like, the bottom circle.
Yeah.
I didn't think.
No, they did not get to the bottom.
Though I do think that at the end, when they have to run by that guy in the chair, I did feel like he was supposed to be the devil himself.
That would, you know what? That would actually, I don't know. I hope it doesn't sound like I'm trying to make stretches here, but that would make sense to me in terms of, like, the people being stuck in the walls. Because in the ninth circle, Satan is in the center, and everybody around him is stuck in ice.
Oh, see, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that makes a lot of sense. Well, and then the guy in the chair, like, the obstacles that they have to go through are the same on both sides of him, right? So when they go past him, they go through the obstacles, and then they keep going, and it's the same obstacles, basically. So that would make sense that he was, like, the center. So he was the bottom circle, and then they kept going to go back up to get out.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I love this movie. This movie is so good. And it was one that, like, got bad reviews.
I know.
And so I didn't watch it for a really long time because I thought, oh no, I heard it was shitty. And then I had walking pneumonia, and I was just laying in bed watching, like, every single horror movie I could find. And it was on HBO, and I was like, great, I'm going to try it. And then I loved it.
I think I had, when it came out, I had heard of it, but I didn't really have a desire to see it. And then a guy that I was dating at the time found out that I was really into Dante's Inferno, and he was like, you know, they made a movie out of that, right? It's like, no. Like, what are you talking about? And that's how I found out about it. And now it's one of my favorite movies. When I was, like, doing research for it, I saw a bunch of reviews saying stuff like, as above, so below, how to not do found footage.
Oh my god, no.
It's like, what's your problem?
Right.
There's a lot of, like, really scathing reviews of this movie out there, and I just don't get any of them. Crazy people.
Yeah, I thought it was really good, and I think a lot of people said it was a great idea, but it was poorly executed. I really didn't think so at all, except I think the ending was a little, like, formulaic. Like, the very ending. But the rest of it, I just have never seen anything quite like it, and I thought it was extremely thoughtful. I just wish they could hold the goddamn camera still, because I almost puked.
Yeah, it was definitely... I don't know, I felt like it almost didn't have to be found footage. Like, it could have just been a straight shot horror movie, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think the found footage really added anything to the movie.
I don't think so either. I don't think it made me feel any more like I was actually there. They could have just done that with some unique camera work and not had it be under the guise of a documentary.
Yeah, I mean, well, and these guys did. I don't know if you guys ever saw the Poughkeepsie tapes.
I did not, but I want to see that so bad.
Okay.
Isn't it, like,
That
really
is-
hard to find?
This is the same people. It's extremely hard to find because it was never actually released.
So frustrating.
It's, okay, so apparently it has finally been released. You can purchase it now. But for a long time, it was one of those movies that, like, leaked online, and the only way you could find it was to go on, like, the Pirate Bay and download the torrent, which is how I saw it. But this is the same directors. But that movie is... Don't eat before you watch that movie.
Okay.
Okay.
Or maybe don't watch it on...
That's always good to know for me.
Maybe don't watch it on an empty stomach, though. Maybe, like, eat an hour before. But it's really disgusting. Really.
I just saw the description of
extremely
it.
disgusting.
The description on Google is... Hundreds of videotapes of torture, murder, and dismemberment show a killer's decade-long reign of terror.
Oh, dear God.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, and it's literally sequence after sequence of this guy murdering people. I mean, it's the definition of torture porn. Murdering them in
it looks
horrific ways.
Realistic.
Yes, it's very realistic looking, and it's really gross. And I don't know if I wouldn't say that I liked it or that I would ever watch it again or that I could ever recommend it, but I've never seen anything else like it. So we'll put it that way.
Well, I went to it on Amazon, and it's, okay, so at the top, it tells you what other customers have viewed. One of them is Serbian film. So,
oh my
that
God,
says a lot.
The movie where a guy rapes a baby, that movie. Yep, yeah. I saw that one too. Don't watch it.
I did not, and I won't.
I have not seen it.
I don't know what possessed me to watch it, but I was like, it can't be that bad, and it was.
Yeah.
It was like, I thought I was gonna vomit. I had turned it off. I did not finish it.
Yikes.
I watched it with this guy that I went on, like, I don't know, 2 or 3 dates with, like, a long time ago, and
was he, like, a big fan of it?
No, he just liked horror movies, and so did I, and he was like, I heard this was really fucked up, and I was like, oh my God, how bad could it be? And then we got to that part, and I was like, I don't want to watch this movie anymore, and he just said, yeah, I really don't want to either.
Oh my God.
So we turned it off, but yeah.
So my ex is a huge fan of that movie, and it, like, started to bother me after a while. It was like...
That's, like, red flag central.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I'm sorry, no. But anyway, that's the only other one of these guys' movies that I've ever seen, I think. No, wait, they did Quarantine, which I've seen. Yeah. They did Devil, which is in the elevator. Well, I've seen all their movies. Never mind.
I liked Devil. I know everybody makes fun of that
I thought
movie.
Devil was okay.
I liked it.
I thought it was okay. I thought Quarantine was okay, but I thought the movie it was based on was way better.
Wait, I thought Devil was an Eli Roth movie.
I thought Devil was an M. Night Shyamalan movie.
Oh, no, it might be M. Night Shyamalan.
He wrote it. He wrote it, but then these guys...
Yeah.
These are brothers. Yeah, they directed it.
That's right.
Anyway, they also did a really good miniseries about Waco with Taylor Kitsch playing David Koresh. It was very good. Anyway, do we have any more questions about the movie? We're so far off topic.
I think we can all go home now if we want.
Yeah, well, I liked this movie a lot. I was very... skeptical, but it was good. So if people haven't seen it, they should watch it. If you haven't seen it, I don't know why you're listening to this, but, you know.
Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter at QOTD Podcast, on Facebook at facebook.com/QOTD Podcast, Tumblr at queensofthedamnpodcast.tumblr.com, and YouTube at Queens of the Damn Podcast.
Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes, Podbean, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play, and TuneIn Radio. You can also follow us on our blog, queensofthedamnpodcast.wordpress.com, to find bonus content and extra information on our episodes.
If you would like to donate to our show, you can find us at patreon.com/QOTD podcast, where you can receive special perks as a listener for becoming a monthly patron. If you would like to make a one-time donation, you can send it to QOTDpodcast@gmail.com on PayPal. We'll see you next week. So the elevator on the Devil poster, the light looks like Kylo Ren's lightsaber.
It does. That's
I'm
hilarious.
done now.
Oh my God.